Good evening. My name is Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Welcome to the forum, and thanks for joining us online. Daniel Darling, the Senior Vice President of Communications for National Religious Broadcasters, an organization for members of Christian media, wrote a column for USA Today about his decision to get vaccinated against COVID-19, writing in part, quote, "As a Christian and an American, I was proud to get it." The column cost him his job. Author of A Way with Words, Using Our Online Conversations for Good, and now director of the Land Center for Cultural Engagement at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Darling helps shape conversations on faith, ethics, public policy, and other cultural and philosophical issues. Each year, the Cathedral chooses a theme for inspiration and reflection, and in 2022, our theme is connection. In a time when even a public health emergency is divisive and public discourse is coarse beyond belief, we'll be talking tonight about how you can have both courage and civility at the same time. Dan, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're so grateful that you're here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. One of the things I've been thinking so much and almost haven't talking to almost everybody I see about lately is just asking them what you've learned through the COVID crisis. So, I mean, I know it's different for you and for everybody, but I wonder how you answer that question these days.
You know, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of things that could be said. I think, first of all, I think it reminded us a bit of our mortality. You know, as Christians, the scriptures tell us that we're made from dust. And a common refrain when someone passes away and we honor them, we talk about ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But I think COVID really brought us front and center, brought our mortality front and center, and the fact that we, especially if you're younger, if you feel like you're invincible, and here's this mysterious virus that we can't see, that really kind of shut down a lot of things, divided us in many ways in terms of how to approach it. We lost a lot of loved ones, too many people, I think, hundreds of thousands here in the United States, millions worldwide. And also, I think, exposed our ability to come together in many ways. I know we were divided at some points, but there were some great stories of people coming together, people ministering in their communities, of people reaching out. I think the last thing it showed is our need for embodied connection. Thankfully, we had technology like Zoom, have technology where we could conduct meetings online, we could shut things down and still do business in many ways. Although, for those who are more in the working class, who work with their hands, for a time, they were unable to work, which was really hard on working class folks. But we did have technology that enables us to do a lot of things without being with each other. But I think we suffered for it in the sense that we're made for community. I think our country as a community suffered, and part of the reason it's not the whole reason, but it's a reason I think that we're often so divided over the last couple of years is because we're inside, we're not with each other in our normal gatherings, and our conversations are mediated through screens, they're mediated through devices, which makes us feel, when you're in person with someone, when you're going to those everyday meetings, whether it's a PTA meeting with your kids, whether it's a potluck at church, whether it's another meeting at work, even the kinds of things you kind of roll your eyes and say, oh, that's on my schedule, I got to do that. All those things form and shape us in many ways, and they shape our communities. And so if there is a tiny silver lining in the COVID pandemic, and I don't want to trivialize the immense suffering, but if there's a tiny silver lining, I think it reawakened us to the need that technology is really great. We could use it for a lot of good, but it's not ultimate. And we are people of community. We're people that are embodied. I think as a Christian, we kind of see this throughout the kind of Christian theology teaches this. And I think it caused us to be reawakened to our need for that.
That's a great answer. What led you to write that column that you wrote on COVID and your vaccination in USA Today? And were you surprised by people's response to it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I contribute frequently to USA Today, and this was a time where there's a couple of things I was motivated by. I mean, first of all, I think the debates were just starting to get heated a little bit about the vaccine. I think so. That was one reason. I think another reason is we've lost several people close to us because of COVID. Our piano teacher, she taught our kids piano for 7 years. My son's a musician. He went there every day for 7 years. She passed away from COVID very suddenly. She was 50 years old. She was in otherwise good health. She, got COVID and said, yeah, I can't do the lesson this week. And then, a day later said, I'm gonna go to the hospital just to make sure everything's okay. And then we checked back in and she had passed away. And we were devastated. My kids were devastated. We were devastated. We loved her so much. And we lost some other folks. So I wanted to make the case to folks who are a little bit skeptical. But it's interesting, if you read the column and my subsequent appearance on Morning Joe, I had two reasons for writing it. One, I wanted to talk to folks who maybe are a little bit skeptical and say, hey, listen, I get why you're skeptical. But here's why I got it, and kind of lay out some of those things. Just use my own experience and not say, hey, you need to go get it, otherwise you're not a good person. I don't think that kind of persuasion works. So just say, here's why I got it, and here's why, you might consider getting it. But the other reason I wanted to show is I wanted to show people who were pro-vaccine a way of persuading people who disagreed with them. Because I think a lot of not all of it, but a lot of the persuasion was kind of condescending, was kind of, if you don't meet people where they are with their skepticisms, I think you're not going to persuade them. And so I just kind of walked through, hey, listen, I understand why there's skepticism. There's widespread distrust among institutions across society. It's a new thing. And yet, here's why I got it. And I laid out some of these reasons. And I was really surprised that it cost me my job. A lot of our members are NRB members. Most of them, if not all of them, were pro-vaccine. Many of them led vaccine drives. We had, as an organization, been pro-vaccine. We put out statements about it. So it kind of caught me by surprise. I mean, I think it's just a disagreement among friends. So I don't have any ill will against them, and not on a crusade or anything against them. I really, wish them well. I think just a misunderstanding. I was trying to persuade. I was trying to defend folks who are skeptical. But I think it's just another casualty in the last couple of years of division in this country that, we're allowing things to divide us that really shouldn't in many ways.
I mean, that's a big question I have. I mean, we just came back from visiting my wife's family. And so one of my nieces had brain surgery. So she's like 7 years old and she just had brain surgery. And so that family is just like, everybody's solidly vaccinated and they're so cautious about everything. And then my other branch of the family, my nephews and nieces, they're not going to get vaccinated. So they're even, they work for United Airlines. They're going to lose their job over it. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just like, how did we get to the point where they would feel so committed to their stance on vaccination that they would basically lose their job in order to remain unvaccinated? Like, how do we get there? I mean, because all of us are vaccinated against polio and mumps, measles, and rubella. Every adult I know is vaccinated. So why is this vaccination, so different for people like my nephews and nieces?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on here. I think it's a perfect storm. First of all, I think we should be somewhat, thankful that a high percentage of Americans are getting vaccinated, and even among conservatives, even among evangelicals, which I'm an evangelical, the percentage is fairly high, and it's gone higher. So it's a small percentage that's a holdout. So that's good. But I do think there's a couple of things going on here. I think, again, there's widespread distrust in institutions that is, many decades in the making. And if you think across society, every institution has kind of let us down in some way, whether it's our governments, our media, or business, the church, in many ways. And so people look across and they say they don't know who to trust. And I think that kind of thing gives way to a lot of cynicism.
Mhm.
That's one reason. I think another reason is, I know like the medical establishment community has done a really heroic job and has a very difficult job, medical and scientific community. But I think there were some mixed messages along the way in the last couple of years that have sown a little bit of skepticism on the part of folks. But also, we're just in a very polarized age, and everything becomes fodder for politics, for arguing for kind of a tribal identity. We're in an age where everybody has a voice. So in some ways that's good. You think about the deregulation of media and the prevalence of social media. Everybody has a voice. Everyone can publish. Everyone can say something. That's good in many ways because it lifts up voices that maybe did not have a platform before, and we can hear from those who've been marginalized in many ways. And yet it also means everyone has a voice. And so there's all sorts of things coming at us. Today, people are I heard someone say this, and I think it's really good, that we're so tribal these days that we actually don't join groups because of shared loves, but because of shared hatreds. And so when we sort ourselves into those groups, we sometimes are tempted to adopt positions that we may not have adopted before because, this position, say on a vaccine, is a tribal marker of where you are. And so to be anti-vax is to say, I'm giving a middle finger to the establishment. I'm giving a middle finger to media. I'm giving a middle finger to all of that. I think that's a dangerous place for people to be. I think some experts call this kind of negative epistemology, where, we're defined by what we don't believe and what we're against. And so that puts us in an interesting place where, a life-saving vaccine becomes something that we're opposed to. And I think, our leaders haven't helped either on either side, stoking some of this, whether it's, I think last year in 2020, when the vaccine was being developed, there were some on the left who were saying, well, if Trump rushes this out, I'm not taking it because it's not going to be good. Even Vice President said that. President Biden said, expressed that, like, I wouldn't take a Trump vaccine, which I think hurt. And then obviously when the election flipped, it was people on the right saying that. And, I think it's interesting how people flip based on their politics. What's interesting, and I wrote this in the column, and I told people, however you feel about Trump or Biden, they're both for the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't find two more opposite folks. So that tells me that it can't be that much of it can't be a conspiracy or something, because I don't think Trump would just sign on to that. And I don't think Biden would sign on to that. So anyways, but sometimes it's hard to convince people. And I think you have to sort of meet them where they are. And, but it is perplexing, to say the least, that we have a life-saving vaccine. And one of the things I tell people about it at this point is, the vaccine won't keep you from getting COVID. We know that, but it could keep you from dying.
Yeah.
And, if you have a family, for me, I don't want to take my chance. If something were to happen to me outside of my control, I trust that the Lord took me home, and it's my time. But if I do something deliberately to put my family in a place where they don't have their father, their husband, I don't think that's good stewardship of the life that God's given me. So I've tried to have those conversations with folks, and hopefully the opposition is wearing down, but you still have folks who are kind of identified by that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, so we have this family, and they're my in-laws too. So it's not like I'm going to go there and straighten everybody out. Do you know what I mean? And so it's funny because, obviously, they have their pastor, and I'm the pastor of this congregation here. But we just don't talk very much about what we disagree about. And I don't know, maybe I don't know if that's the right approach or not the right approach, but it gets to be more of a question, like you say, when it comes to these life and death issues. it's a whole congregation, their whole congregation, no one's vaccinated in the whole congregation. So it's a tough one. It's a really tough call. And, I grew up in an environment where things were just a lot less polarized, in the sense that you had just like a greater diversity of political expressions in each congregation. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost like people are grouping more around that political identity. It almost seems like the political identity matters more than kind of like the religious practice or religious identity.
You're exactly right about that. I think that's one thing that's distressing, that a lot of these divisions do cut across the traditional left-right boundary markers, but not all of them. And increasingly, you're seeing it people who ostensibly believe the same things being divided over political things, or things like that. And it's something, when I talk to pastors around the country, pastors who are conservative like me and conservative, politically, theologically, or when I talk to pastors who are more progressive, they're telling me the same things, that their congregation, who they thought they agreed on things, are getting separated. On the right, it could be, if someone is super political, or goes down a kind of a rabbit trail with some of those things, like, conspiracy theories and things, and that can be divisive in churches. But then I'm seeing among progressives too, like if someone on the left goes super far left and gets radicalized in that way, and that can be divisive. And so I think one of the things we have to do is figure out ways to love people and see them in all of their humanity, even if they disagree with us. So that person I disagree with, I might think they're wrong, but my theology tells me that every person is made in the image of God. Every person has worth dignity and respect. And we tend to reduce people down to that one part of them we don't like, so that when they walk in the room, all we see is their bad opinion. And in some ways, we dehumanize people. So we have to say, can I be friends with someone? Can I hang on to this friendship, even though I think they're out to lunch in this area or that area? And can they feel that way about me? And I think that requires intentionality. That requires embodied friendships that go beyond just mediated by screens. The one beautiful thing about the internet is that people of shared interest can find each other. But one of the bad things about the internet is people of shared interest can find each other, because you can get into these narrow subgroups to where you're never exposed to people who might have a different opinion from you. So I think the more we're around people, and the more we're out of our sort of bubbles, politically and otherwise, and we rub up against people who are different, I think it changes the way we think. We may not change our beliefs, but we may look at people in that, that we disagree with a little bit differently, and say, yeah, here's kind of why they're coming to that position. I don't agree with it, but this is why they're there.
And I guess that's a kind of a nice thing about just that, again, back to my family and my relationship with those in-laws. I don't need to tell them what my political position is on everything. And, they can kind of figure out a lot of what it is that I think about, how I think about the world, for my social media stuff. And so, so there's a way in which, we just don't have to have those, because it's much more important for me to express to them that I love them. I mean, that's like the bottom line is I absolutely adore and love them. I care so much about them. And I guess that's part of what I'm being cautious about. I just don't want to break something that's so beautiful, for the sake of making sure that everybody conforms to my opinions.
Yeah. And there's a lot of pressure to break those friendships. There's pressure by our tribes to say, you have to break off from that person. They're toxic in this way or that way. So if, this idea that, if you're progressive and you go home and your family's conservative and you go home for Thanksgiving, you just got to tell those people they're wrong for voting for Trump and they shouldn't have done that and they're toxic. You need to tell them off. Or if you're conservative, you need to go to your progressive family and tell them how woke they are and how ridiculous they are and it's just, I don't think that's healthy. I don't think we grow by doing that. And I don't think that's good for society. And I think particularly as people of faith, as Christians, I think there's a way to have courage about what we believe, but also do it in a way that is civil and respecting the person that we disagree with. And so, yeah, you go home to your family, and some of them are, COVID really exposed that, right? So you may have some family that is super COVID cautious, and man, they're like, they're going to be wearing a mask till, for 30 more years. And instead of saying, hey, what's your problem? Take that mask off. Don't you know you don't need to wear it? Just, respect the fact that they are a little bit more cautious than you are. Or you may go to parts of your family that doesn't think COVID is even real, and is not getting vaccinated, and think, okay, I disagree with that, but I'm not going to let that ruin my friendship. I'm going to love people where they're at. And it doesn't mean you don't have hard conversations. It doesn't mean that sometimes you don't engage in something. I actually think we can have robust and meaningful debates, and we all actually need, and one of the things I try to encourage folks, and I've written about this, but I think we all need friends that disagree with us. I think everyone needs to have a friend to the right of them that they think's a little bit out there, and to the left of them they think it's a little bit out there. And I have that, and we have debates. Things come up, and but the ability at the end of that conversation to say, man, I don't think I land where you land on this, but I see where you're coming from. You raised some good points. I really appreciate you. And being able to do that, I think, is so important for us, particularly as Christians, as people who say we follow Jesus. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. One of the things I think a lot about is just the technology that, as you said, is just like that there's room for a lot more voices. And it is just like really new to us. I mean, I remember like having the first website of any church in our whole region, right? We were the Path Breakers, and it was basically like a pamphlet. It was like a sheet of, it was like what you'd put on the sign in front of your church. That was our website, and we were so proud of that. But the technology has really changed. I wonder if you see ways that we're just not caught up with the technology yet, or where do you see us going? Because we're still in the midst of just such radical change. I wonder, you followed, in your book, Away with Words, you talk a little bit about, civility online. I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about where you see these technologies taking us, and just like why this particularly matters for Christians.
Yeah, I think it really matters for Christians. I think we need really good ethical reflection on technology, so that we can ask the question, not just what are we doing with technology, but what may technology be doing with us? And I think for Christians, we have a pretty expansive view of what technology is. And we're not anti-progress in technology. In fact, our mandate from Genesis is to be fruitful and multiply and to cultivate the earth. And so in one sense, technology is the act of cultivating the raw resources that God has given us to develop and to innovate. And if you think about it, everything at one level was technology. The wheel was a new piece of technology. The book, and I still try to convince my kids, a paper book is one of the greatest pieces of technology ever invented. I still think that way, right?
Yeah, the first books we have are the Nag Hammadi library. That's the first, like, codex, like that's a real book.
Printed books, a printing press. I mean, it's just,
yeah,
what a gift. Language. And so all that was technology. And so when we think of technology, sometimes we think of laptops and smartphones and watches and all that, and it is. So I think, we don't want to make this mistake of being anti-technology. I think the act of it is cultivating the earth God's given us, but we also recognize we're in a fallen world. We're in a post-Eden world. So there's ways in which technology can be used for harm, the ways that it can be used for things that aren't good for us. So we have to always be intention in saying, not just, we don't want to just at the one level reject everything new, but we also don't want to critically embrace everything new. And I think we need to think this way about social media, and figure out ways to say, look, social media is going to be here to stay. We as a society are not going to go back to the 1950s. We're not going to suddenly all become Amish. Mm-hmm. So how can we live well, and how can we care for our souls, and how can we use this leverage this technology in a way that is good, but not harmful. And I think that looks a little different for every family, for every church. I think as the church, we have an interesting role because we can teach what God says, what's good about creation, what's good about innovation. But also there's a way in which gathering with our religious practices is a kind of respite for a digitally saturated world.
I totally
If you
agree.
think
Almost
about,
like I said this in a radio interview. It was the typical radio interview where you had the Christian, the Jew, and the Muslim.
yeah,
And it was the young, the Jewish person we had was very young, like he was 27 or something. And I said, in a way, church or gathering in the way you just described is kind of like the antidote to just online life.
absolutely.
Yeah,
It absolutely is. I feel that so much. I think there's a way in which our church gatherings are an analog sort of oasis in a digitally saturated world, because we leverage technology. We have so many churches have lyrics on the screens, or we have websites, and all that's good. I mean, we have air conditioning, that's technology, but there's a kind of analog slowness to our sacred rituals, whether you're a Southern Baptist like me, or you're Anglican, high church, or Presbyterian or Methodist, or whatever your liturgy is. There's a way in which that is so formative and a digital respite. And I think COVID showed us that a little bit. And I wrote about this in a way with words, but people will say, particularly in the evangelical tradition, you'll hear people say sometimes, look, I've stopped going to church because, man, I could watch it online. I can listen to music online. And if church is just reduced to like, if all you think about church is that it's a TED talk with good music, well, yeah, you can get better content online. Of course, you'll find a better preacher than your pastor, your local guy online. You'll find better music. But that's not all church is. There's something formative about the rhythms, the sort of ordinary rhythms. I've been going to church my whole life since I was like 4, and I've forgotten most of the sermons I've heard. But I will say that year after year, week after week, singing those hymns, hearing those messages of the gospel, fellowshipping with people has shaped my heart in ways I didn't realize till you get older.
Yeah.
And those rhythms matter. So that person behind you that sings off key, the usher that tells the same joke about the weather, the people in your life group or small group or whatever, however you gather, that has the same prayer requests, or, all that seems rote and routine is actually good for us. James K. Smith wrote a great book called You Are What You Love. And it's a great book about the way that rhythms shape us. And I'm convinced of that. And so I don't think churches should be anti-technology, even in the way we worship. I think we should try to press our message into all the different platforms, because people are seeking truth, they're seeking connection with God, and we should be there to meet them. At the same time, we need to really think critically about adopting too much technology, even in our worship. And what are we communicating? The medium itself, as Marshall McLuhan said, can be the message. Yeah. And so I think we need to think about that. It reminds me of when I pastored my first church in the Chicago area. I was like 29 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a young kid, kind of revitalizing this church. And I made the big decision that we were going to project our song lyrics, our hymn and worship lyrics on the wall.
Right.
And we already had the technology. And man, there was one elderly couple there that was fiercely resistant to it. And I listened to their concerns. And I just said, I think we need to do this. We need to move forward. And I still think I made the right decision. But at the time I thought, man, these people are so anti-progress. What is their problem? Just get with the program. 10, 15 years later, I'm thinking, I have a little bit of those people in me now to say, yeah, let's embrace technology, but let's be slow. Let's give people a respite from everything that they're seeing around them throughout the rest of the week.
Yeah, there is definitely something that feels like a connection to other generations too, who had
Yeah.
similar worship experiences. It's funny, as you were talking, I was just like, I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you came to be a person of faith. I love, through the formation of people's messages and from the music, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about your own faith journey.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It goes back really to my parents, and my dad. So my dad came from a broken home. His biological father, who he didn't really know till he was older, was an alcoholic. His stepfather struggled with alcohol. They rarely went to church, if at all. So I think they were kind of somewhat attached to denomination, but I don't think they were that much attached. When he was in his early 20s, my aunt, who's older than him, started watching this guy on TV named Billy Graham.
Mm.
And she said, Mike, you've got to watch this guy named Billy Graham. So he started watching a little bit. Well, in 1971, Billy Graham came to Chicago for the 1971 Billy Graham Crusade in Chicago, in McCormick Place. And my dad went with his mom, and they walked forward and became Christians, and really changed the trajectory of an entire family.
Yeah.
And he became a Christian. It's interesting. He met my mom. They dated for a while. My mom came from a Jewish family. She converted to Christianity. So I'm Jewish, but also a Christian, and sometimes that confuses people in many ways. And so, I became a Christian at a young age. They took us to church. I accepted, I put my faith in Christ at a young age, at age of like 4 or 5. And I think it was real. Sometimes there's cause to say, is a conversion real when a kid is 4 or 5? And sometimes you wonder, but for me, it was real. And God has always given me a love for church, a love for the Bible, a love for theology, a love for the simplicity of the gospel message that Jesus came to save sinners, to rescue us from sin, from ourselves, to that Jesus came to renew and restore a broken world, and that he's coming again to fully complete that. This is what gives me hope in the world. The idea of the resurrection of Jesus, that if Jesus really did rise again from the grave, and if that means all his promises are true, that he defeated sin and death in the grave, and that not only does that mean that I will live in eternity, but it also means that there's another world coming, that this world is not all there is, that there's something better coming. And I think instinctively, wherever you are, we all long for, I think we all accept those realities, right? That the world is not as it should be. I don't think anyone looks around and says, yeah, everything's good. I think the world is not as it should be. It's deeply broken. I think we all accept that even the best of us have demons, that have parts of us that are not, healthy. And I think we all accept that we're looking for something to save us. I even think of the way that our world just seems to reach for the transcendent. My kids love these superhero movies. I mean, we constantly watch them. And there's something in there, in those stories we tell ourselves, that we need something outside of us to save us. And so I think the Christian story tells the best story, that God came in Jesus to not only save us from ourselves, to reconcile us to the God who made us, but also to renew and restore the world. And so that's kind of been my story. I really believe it. And I think in many ways, faith and religion can divide people, but I also think that it can bring people together as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's brought us together today. I mean, what a blessing it is to be, brothers in Christ and sharing our stories. I mean, what a gift. And you're right, the technology made it possible. And one day when you come to visit San Francisco, we'll see each other in person.
Yes, absolutely.
My faith changes so much in so many different ways. Like, I just have different focuses in different stages of my life. But I wonder if you can tell us about what your favorite book of the Bible is, what your favorite theologian is, favorite mystic or historical figure, and some of those things that kind of give us a picture of kind of where you are now.
Yeah, it's hard to say what my favorite book of the Bible is, because it's probably the last one I read, but
yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I just finished writing a book on Genesis. And so in some ways, Genesis is one of my favorite books because the book of beginnings. Um, I just marvel still at the way that Genesis makes these profound statements that, first of all, there's a God, that he's personal, that he speaks, but also what it says about humanity. I personally think that the idea of human dignity in Genesis is one of the best gifts Christianity gives to the world. Yeah. That every human being has dignity and worth. And there's other religions that have this concept. So it's not unique, but I think what's unique is just the most robust vision of that is in the Bible, and it starts in Genesis. I also like Peter, First Peter. There's something in Peter that really resonates with me. That here's a simple fisherman who was kind of impetuous at times, and yet it failed Jesus. At the time of Jesus' greatest need, and yet was restored and became a really powerful preacher. Tradition says he was martyred for his faith. I love the way Peter talks to Christians. When Peter's talking to that first century of the church, Christianity wasn't a worldwide movement. It was a fledgling movement in the Roman Empire, marginalized in many ways. And yet his word to them is both to stand firm in what you believe, but also not fear and not be afraid to be a minority movement, and to love the people who may not understand you and who may disagree with you. And so I think those two are really important. In terms of favorite thinker, it's hard. It's hard. There's so many, the church is so rich with so many great treasures. It's hard to get past Augustine's Confessions.
I love Confessions.
Great anchor.
Yeah.
The church fathers are just amazing. I love the reformers, as a Protestant, reading through those reformers. I love C.S. Lewis. I can't get enough of Lewis. In modern times, I'm a big fan of Tim Keller. I love all his work. Let me see here. N.T. Wright, if you've read N.T. Wright's stuff. Of course. Yeah. Others like that. Philip Yancey, others like that. Political figure. That's a good question. I love politics. I mean, one of my hobbies is politics in terms of reading biographies. I love American history. I love biographies. So I really admire, I admire Reagan in many ways. I admire, FDR was a great leader, I believe. They all had their flaws, obviously, so I don't want to whitewash any of those. I've become a lot more, so I'm talking American presidents here, so you can stop me if I'm going too much on that. I think Lincoln, obviously, is a heroic figure. Ulysses Grant, I think he is sort of underrated, particularly with his commitment to civil rights. Of course, MLK, he just an amazing figure, an amazing preacher. The way MLK was able to use rhetoric and theology to really move a nation. The way he used the language of human dignity, the way he used the language of, forgiveness. When he talks about not just the people he's advocating for, but he also, even as he's rebuking the white moderates or the white segregationists, he's also thinking about their humanity.
Yeah, letter to Birmingham jail. That's it. Yeah.
It's really powerful. And so, I think people have said he was one of our, if you talk about like second founding fathers, I think MLK is great. So, those are some of the figures I admire throughout history. Winston Churchill, others. So it's kind of a list off the top of my head,
Yeah, I love it. It gives a picture of what you're thinking about right now and what's going on these days.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about evangelical Christianity. Like, what is evangelical Christianity, and how would you describe both its history and just kind of the direction, that kind of the trajectory that you see evangelical Christianity being on right now?
It's such a good question, and it's hard because people have tried to pin down what are evangelicals. In the one sense, evangelical Christianity, there's not like a one group that you can join.
Right, exactly. It's like the Roman Catholic.
Kind of this amorphous trans-denominational thing.
Yep.
And yet we do have institutions. that are, I think on the one hand, it was, emerged it's hard to pin the origins. I mean, some people go back all the way to, say, the beginning of the first or second Great Awakenings and the sort of evangelical trans-denominational movements led by some of those figures like George Whitefield and others. Others go back further. It's hard to say. I think the modern evangelical movement really started in the early part of the 20th century as sort of a renewal movement among the traditional Protestant denominations, when many denominations sort of maybe shifted left theologically. It was kind of a renewal movement, a trans-denominational renewal movement. And so I think that's sort of what it is in many ways. I think Richard Mouw has a great thing in his one of his books. I think it's called Adventures in Evangelical Civility, but a chapter where he talks about how evangelical Christianity is strongest when it has really strong denominations. So when denominations are robust and they're catechizing their own, it makes the whole movement stronger. But when it doesn't, this sort of amorphous denomination or movement, it's kind of hard to pin down. I think lately, in many ways, it's become more defined by politics. So, I think that happens in two ways. I think there's both an insider and outsider reason for that. Obviously the numbers show that evangelicals, for the most part, vote Republican, vote conservatively, and I think there's valid reasons for that. I think sometimes there can be times where evangelicals are too wed to one party, just like other faith groups can be too wed to a party. I think this happens on the left and the right in terms of with faith groups. But I think sometimes one of the reasons we're so kind of identified by politics is because we've done that to ourselves. We become in some ways more known for that than for other things. But on the other hand, I think sometimes it's become a label thrust on people by kind of sociologists and journalists and others in a way that's unhelpful. What's interesting, if you talk to the average evangelical, they will not say, I'm an evangelical. They'll say, I'm a follower of Christ. They might say, hey, I'm a Baptist, or hey, go to a Lutheran church, or hey, I go to this non-denominational church. So that's the interesting thing about it. Like, most people don't go around wearing that label. I think in terms of probably the best definition is the one that historian David Bebbington gave. And there's this fourfold definition of, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but there's kind of four markers in terms of the missionary character, the cross-centered character centered on the cross of Christ. It's called the Bebbington quadrilateral that kind of says this is what marks. And I think for most evangelical institutions, that kind of defines their core beliefs, if you will. But I think the movement is increasingly splintered, increasingly, the same divisions that have made their way through almost every American institution, right, left, and center. Evangelicals are having those same conversations, those same divisions, those same arguments, cultural, political, class divisions. So unlike, I think, in a time maybe during previous era where you could say there's a little bit more cohesiveness and unity, we're a little bit more splintered into tribes, just like is happening in the rest of American society. And I say, as an evangelical, that's sad. I wish that weren't the case. In fact, I'm writing a book right now on Christian unity that hopefully, who knows if it'll contribute to that, but that's kind of the aim for it. Does that make sense? I know I kind of...
Definitely. I love the idea too. Just like, we go through different cycles, and we go through cycles of kind of gathering together, and we go to cycles kind of like centripetal and centrifugal times, and we are now at a time where things are getting scattered, but it reminds me of the time to sow, the time to reap, from Ecclesiastes, just that there are different seasons that we're experiencing different kinds of things.
Yeah, I do think this, that if I can defend our tribe a little bit, look, we've had our share of scandals. We have to own up to the people that we've championed in terms of politics that have been bad. There's reform that's needed within our movement. So I'm not denying any of those things. But I will say, a lot of the stories that get written about evangelicals are mostly negative. And again, I can't refute a lot of those because they're true. But there's a lot of good that evangelicals do. Chances are, at the worst places in the world, the most war-torn, distressed places, you don't have to look very far to see evangelicals meeting human needs.
Yeah.
Whether it's relief efforts right now going on at the border in Poland with Ukrainian refugees. We have my own denomination, Southern Baptists, have volunteers there right now from our churches over there, feeding meals and helping people with medical needs and all kinds of things. There's evangelicals in places of the world that most of us don't even know or have forgotten. Even here in the United States, whenever there's a disaster, we're usually the first ones on the scene. So we obviously need to atone and take responsibility for the negative things. But also, I think evangelicals are doing a lot of good. And I think that squares a lot with our faith, that, the story of the Christian church is not the goodness of the people, although there are good people, but it's that we are sinners who have been redeemed and rescued and transformed and are in the process of becoming more like Jesus. And so, yes, you will find tremendous hypocrisy in our churches. We believe that God is in the business of saving hypocrites, and so that's not to whitewash sin and corruption, but just to kind of give a more nuanced sort of vision of what evangelicals are.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. I was mentioning just before we started talking that we have just a tradition of taking questions. And, when we do the forum in person, they come up on little note cards that I read. But now people just send them into Rebecca. So the first question that we got is this. I'm wondering how those of us outside the evangelical world, particularly the Southern Baptist Church, should interpret high-level exits like your own, thinking of Russell Moore and Beth Moore too. Obviously, there's a wider left, right, et cetera, polarization, but it seems like there's conflict in the SBC as well. What does that internal reconciliation look and feel like to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I'm friends with both Russell Moore and Beth Moore, great people. I hate what they've endured. I think it's a sign of increasing polarization of our times, that a lot of times we're allowing ourselves to be sort of identified less by our shared creedal commitments, whether we're Southern Baptists or Presbyterians, and more by our political commitments. So it falls in line with that we're drawing lines in places that we didn't draw them before, that maybe we shouldn't draw them. And so I think it's really disheartening. I would say for Southern Baptists that, we are having the same conversations and the same divisions that I think are going through every American institution, and every religious institution. And really, you could talk to denominational leaders across the spectrum and they'll all kind of tell you a similar story. Southern Baptists are the second largest Protestant we're the largest Protestant denomination. We have a very democratic polity, a very noisy polity. And so our family squabbles usually land us on the front page because of that. That's not to say that they're good or to justify it, but because we're the biggest, we're covered. And because we have this sort of democratic polity that way, which I think is healthy and good, but it also lends itself to that. And so, I think, again, Christians are dividing over things that are really unfortunate, that we can't just say, look, this person voted for someone over here, or this person felt uncomfortable voting for this person, but we believe so much and we hold so much in common. Why do we have to push them away? Whether it's, if you want to call it cancel culture, if you want to call it whatever. So I think it's unfortunate. I mean, I'm a proud Southern Baptist, and yet I really lament that folks like Russell Moore, who I worked for about 6.5 years, and Beth Moore, who I admire, feel like, this isn't a home for me anymore. I think that should cause us to do some reflection and say, what can we do differently as a denomination to make people feel more welcome that way?
Yeah. I wonder if you can talk, I mean, you're so close to kind of like seminary education right now. I wonder if you can talk about just how that seminary experience is different now than it was before, or, kind of what's the temperature like in our nation's seminaries right now?
That's a great question. I think the whole nature of higher ed is changing in some ways with the proliferation of online formats and all those things. And I think you're seeing that across the spectrum in higher education. But I do think there's also an appreciation for, if possible, people have the means to go and study, in an environment, in a community during a period of your life in order to shape you that way.
I worry a little bit about the online people being kind of second-class citizens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If your primary formation is online, it may be harder to be effective once you're, in a parish setting.
It is. I mean, in some ways, it makes it easier and more accessible for folks that want to go back and get their theological degree while they're working. And so I'm grateful for that. I think of like, working moms or other people late in life. But at the same time, and I think seminaries have to figure out, wait, how do you make it a good experience for everybody in that way? One of the other things that is really encouraging is a lot of women are getting seminary education, seeking theological education. And I think that's a great thing. In fact, if you talk to folks in Christian higher ed or any higher ed, that's really the big momentum, is among young women, young girls saying, I want to go to seminary. I want to go study the word. I think that's going to be great. I think it's going to be great for our churches and great for our communities. I'm excited about the next generation. Maybe I'm overly optimistic. I'm just not. I think it's easy for us in this age to give into cynicism, whether it's the cynicism on the right, and I'm conservative, but cynicism sometimes on the right of like everyone's drifting, everyone's going this way, or cynicism on the left, everyone's bigoted, everyone's racist, and all that. And look, I think we have issues and problems in this country. I think we have issues and problems in our religious institutions, but I'm optimistic about the next generation. This is a generation. It's interesting. It makes me feel old, but the kids graduating college today, many of them were born after 9/11, which is just hard for me to square in my head because being someone so shaped that way. But they have seen a world that has been fairly tumultuous, right? They've seen recessions. They've seen a worldwide pandemic. Now we have war in Europe, not to mention, racial tension. They've seen a lot. I think in many ways, they're aware because this is a generation that's grown up on social media. So they're more aware of the world, aware of what's going on in the world. I think young people today really want to be active and engaged in shaping their communities and serving, loving their neighbors and being involved. But I'm actually really excited about the next generation of the church. I think, look, I believe that as Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. I believe that's true. And it's exciting to see the energy of the next generation. And not just people wanting to do, to go pastor, to go be missionaries, to go, a lot of folks want to go work for NGOs or work in relief and development or work in public service. There's a great, I think, in kids going to college today, that they want to really do something with their lives. They want to make their lives matter. Older generations can sometimes say, oh, the kids today don't want to work and man, I don't see that in the young generation. I see they want to really make a difference. So I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, me too. We see young people coming up through seminary. I'm so impressed.
Yeah.
I mean, each person who's replaced me at each church I've been at has been just incredible. I wonder if do you have like any advice that you would want to share to younger people as they kind of come up and come through?
Yeah, I would. I love that. And I love doing that. I would say number one, study and learn and grow. And one of the pitfalls of this age is that you can quickly shortcut the formation process because you can so easily have a voice. I'm glad we didn't have social media when I was 20. When I was trying to cut my teeth as a writer, there weren't blogs and stuff yet. So I had to really work and submit articles and work with an editor and be shaped and formed that way. Today, you can have a voice, you can build a following, and I would just tell young people, don't seek shortcuts to success. Go through the process, learn and study and grow. Be willing to be mentored by older generations. Find someone who's a few miles ahead of you and ask them questions. When you go to college and seminary, go there to say, I'm not going to go there to teach my teacher something. I'm going to go there to learn from people who are wiser than me, even if I disagree with them. I would also say, just have an open mind and say, I'm going to listen to people who disagree with me politically. I may not come down where they are, but I may learn something different. And I would also just say, your life is full of chapters and seasons, and the next job you do won't be for the rest of your life. It'll be a part of a process, and God will start to sort of refine you and shape you and mold you into that career, into that place where he wants you to be. And I guess if there's one more piece is to say, build long and deep and lasting friendships. Hang on to your friends. We live in an age where there's so much pressure to pull away from your friends because they don't line up with you on every single thing.
Right.
There's tribal pressure. And I would say, just don't do that. Be a bridge builder. Be someone who's willing to be friends across divides. Even if you have that firm convictions, you can have deep convictions, and yet hold them with civility and see people who disagree with you as people made in the image of God, as people worth respecting. Courage and civility are not enemies.
Oh, yeah.
I think we see this in 1 Peter 3, where he says, have an answer for every person for the hope that lies within you. So have courage, speak the truth to the questions of the age, but do it with gentleness and kindness.
Yeah.
And the loudest person in the room is not the most brave. The person who tweets hard every day about some issues may not be doing the most on that issue. The person who is doing the most on behalf of a vulnerable people group may not even be doing it publicly. They may be in your community somewhere, feeding the homeless, or tutoring a child, or quietly advocating, in a state capitol. You may not even know their name. So let's not confuse bravado and machismo and whatever with courage.
Yeah.
So that's the spiel I would give to a young person.
Oh, that's so great. I totally appreciate it. We've had a few other questions that came through, but we're not going to have time for them. One is, what is the status of ordination for women as more young women are going to seminary? Do they have as many opportunities, I think, is the question in the Southern Baptist Church. I don't know if you just have a quick answer for that before we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, every denomination is different. Southern Baptists are what we call complementarian. So we believe that there's a lot of leadership roles for women, and increasingly in our churches, women are taking the lead in a lot of different areas in our educational institutions. But obviously, we still are traditionally complementarian in that the role of a senior pastor, we believe scripturally, is reserved for men. But I do think women coming to seminary is good in many ways. And one, it's raising theological literacy around the country. And I think that's really helpful because women have such a great role to play, whether it's in the workplace, in the workforce, or in religious institutions, or in the home. So I think that's a really healthy thing. And I think it's also helping us, everyone that studies scripture we believe that there's, we believe in truth, but people come at it from a different perspective. And so hearing from a woman's perspective, I think is healthy for the church. And so I guess
I totally agree. I love
my long answer. So
we have only had ordination for women in the Episcopal Church since 1975, and so it's been a movement through my whole life. And I really admire the women who are in my life who are religious leaders. They're a huge blessing to me and to the church as a whole. But I can't believe our time is run out. It seemed like the conversation went by in the blink of an eye. But Dan, I'm so grateful that you took the time to reach across and be part of this conversation. I know that all of us who've been watching have learned so much from you. So thank you very much for your ministry and for your courage in taking that very brave stand on vaccination. And I don't know how God's Spirit is going to direct you going forward, but I hope you have the same kind of courage as you face the next challenges in your life that come up.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I'm honored to talk with you, and great conversation. And really, hopefully it was helpful for whoever was able to listen.
And for all of you who are watching, please join me on Sunday, March 27th, when my guest will be the sociologist Carolyn Chen. We'll be talking about her book, Work, Pray, Code, an account of how today work is trying to satisfy workers' needs for belonging, identity, purpose, and transcendence, needs that many times we expect to be primarily religious needs are being met in other institutions. So that'll be an in-person forum on Sunday, March 27th. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. You can give at gracecathedral.org or by texting THINK, THINK, to 76278. 76278. And thanks again to Dan Darling for being with us tonight. I wish you all well. Until we meet again, I hope all is well with you. Take care.
Well, thank you.